The stars were calm that day, shining over the empty stretch of space where the great white ship moved slowly. It was called Hope of Sol, and everyone who worked in the fleet knew that name. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't armed with missiles or railguns. It was a hospital ship, a place where doctors, nurses, and volunteers cared for the sick and rescued survivors from battle zones. Its pure white hull carried blue humanitarian symbols big enough to be seen from a distance. Anyone who looked at it knew. This ship was built for healing, not fighting. Inside, the crew went about their work with quiet focus. The medical bays were filled with people from several colonies, miners injured in an explosion, families rescued from a damaged freighter, a few wounded soldiers waiting to be sent home. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled oxygen. Machines hummed softly, and the doctors moved quickly but calmly, speaking to each other in short professional tones. For weeks, Hope of Sol had been traveling between the border worlds, moving through uneasy space. The region was supposed to be safe. The Galactic Treaty guaranteed that all medical ships, no matter which species they served, would never be harmed. The crew believed in that rule with all their hearts. After all, who would attack a ship that carried the injured? Far away, near the outer edge of that same region, a different kind of ship drifted in the shadows. It belonged to the Krylon Dominion, a race known for its cold discipline and rigid pride. They had been watching the humans for years, measuring their strength, mocking their kindness. To the Krylon High Command, mercy was weakness, and peace was simply a pause between conquests. That day, one of their patrol groups picked up the signal of the Hope of Sol. The humans were moving slowly, their engines steady, broadcasting medical identification codes. Every few minutes, the message repeated through open channels. Humanitarian vessel Hope of Sol on medical mission. No weapons aboard. Requesting safe passage. The Krylon commander looked at the transmission and laughed. No weapons, he said. Then they are easy prey. His crew hesitated. One officer reminded him of the treaty, but the commander didn't care. He saw a chance to send a message to show that human symbols meant nothing, and so he gave the order. Back on the Hope of Sol, the crew didn't notice the approaching danger right away. They were focused on a patient in surgery, a young engineer who had suffered burns on his hands and chest. The medical team was working under bright lights when the first warning sounded, a proximity alarm. The communications officer checked the radar and frowned. Unidentified ships closing fast, he said. They're not responding to our transmissions. The captain came to the bridge, calm but alert. She ordered another broadcast, louder this time. This is the medical vessel Hope of Sol. We carry no weapons. We request acknowledgement and safe passage. There was no answer, only static. Then the lights flickered. The Krylon ships had begun jamming their signals. Seconds later, the first shot hit. A pulse beam tore through the side of the ship, shaking the decks and throwing people from their stations. The crew screamed as alarms filled the corridors. Fire suppression systems came on automatically, spraying clouds of gas. Inside the medical bay, doctors shielded their patients while power conduits sparked above them. Someone yelled that the hull was breached on the lower levels. The captain's voice came through the speakers, trying to keep everyone calm. All hands, seal bulkheads. Protect the wounded. Repeat, protect the wounded. The Hope of Sol had no guns, no way to fight back. Its shields were minimal, designed only for small debris. The Krylon ship circled like predators, firing again and again. Each blast tore away more of the hull, spilling metal fragments into the void. The medical crew tried to move patients to escape pods, but many of the pods had already been destroyed. Through the front viewport, the captain could see the attackers, black ships with crimson lights. She couldn't understand why they were doing this. She kept sending pleas for ceasefire, repeating that they were non-combatants. But the Krylon commander ignored it. To him, this was justice for his pride, a lesson to remind humans that they were still small in the galaxy. When the main reactor took a hit, the entire ship shook violently. Gravity flickered. Medical stretchers rolled across the floor. In the observation room, a nurse clung to a handrail as the walls cracked apart. She could see space outside now, endless and cold. She cried out for help, but her voice was lost in the noise of alarms. On the bridge, the captain made one final decision. She knew the ship was finished. There was only one thing left to do: send the distress call. The communications officer rerouted all remaining power to the transmitter. Static filled the channel, then a shaky voice broke through. "This is the Hope of Sol medical ship under attack. Request immediate assist. Repeat, under attack. No weapons aboard." The message cut out halfway as the reactor exploded. A flash of light brighter than the sun filled the darkness. The Krylon ships drifted away, leaving nothing behind but debris, twisted metal, burning fragments, and silence. Hours later, a nearby cargo convoy picked up the echo of the distress call. When they arrived, there was no one left to save. They found fragments of medical pods, floating bodies in white uniforms, and pieces of the blue humanitarian symbols scorched black. They recorded everything and sent it to the nearest human outpost. The footage spread across the colonies within a single day. Every screen on every planet showed the same images: the last broadcast from the Hope of Sol, the flash of the explosion, the drifting wreckage. At first, people couldn't believe it. Some thought it was a trick, a fake transmission, but the truth was undeniable. The medical ship had been destroyed, deliberately. Across human space, grief turned into anger. Families wept for those who had died while helping others. Doctors and medics who had once sworn never to harm another living being found themselves trembling with rage. News anchors spoke with choked voices. "They attacked healers," one said. "They attacked mercy itself." The United Earth Council called an emergency session. The footage was replayed in the chamber while hundreds of representatives sat in silence. The room was heavy with emotion. No one spoke until the chairperson stood up and said quietly, "There can be no peace with those who murder the innocent." The words echoed through every communication channel. Protests erupted on Mars, Luna, and the orbital cities. Thousands of people gathered in the streets, holding signs with a single phrase for the Hope of Sol. In the following days, the wreckage of the ship was collected and brought back to Earth. What remained of the hull was placed in a memorial dome near the Pacific spaceport. People lined up for kilometers to see it. Children left flowers beside the scorched plates of metal. Veterans saluted. Old miners who had once been rescued by that same ship stood in silence, their faces hard. No one forgot the sound of the captain's final transmission. It played on repeat across the networks, her voice cracking but steady. "Protect the wounded." To the people of Earth, that single phrase became a symbol of what it meant to be human, to care, to heal, and to stand for life even in the face of cruelty. But beneath the sorrow, a quiet fury was growing. Governments that had long debated military spending suddenly reached unanimous agreement. Defense factories began preparing orders they hadn't received in decades. Engineers started working double shifts. Retired admirals were called back into service. The Krylon Dominion believed they had silenced a soft and peaceful species. What they didn't understand was that humanity had always carried a fire inside, a fire that burned brightest when tragedy struck. The stars were calm again, but the calm was only an illusion. Somewhere deep within Earth's command centers, a new directive was being written. It was short and final. They attacked a medical ship. Earth will respond. No one knew yet what that response would look like, but everyone felt it coming. Families who had lost loved ones held on to each other, waiting. Soldiers who had sworn to protect the peace began preparing for war. The galaxy would soon learn what humanity became when its compassion was betrayed. And floating in the dark, among the wreckage of the Hope of Sol, one blue medical symbol still shone faintly, catching the light of a distant sun. It was cracked and burned, but not destroyed, just like the people who had built it. The news of the destroyed medical ship spread faster than light across every human world. It started as whispers on private channels, then turned into breaking headlines flashing on every screen. Medical vessel Hope of Sol destroyed. No survivors. People read the words again and again, not wanting to believe them. The ship had been a symbol of peace. It carried doctors, volunteers, and the wounded. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a soldier. It was a lifeline. When the first images appeared, the scattered debris, the broken medical insignia, people stopped whatever they were doing. On mining colonies, workers froze mid-shift. In the orbital cities above Earth, children gathered around public screens. Even those who had never met anyone aboard the ship felt the loss as if it were personal. Humanity had lost many things in the long history of the stars, but this felt different. This felt like someone had struck the heart of what it meant to be human. At first, there was only silence. The shock held everyone still. Then came the grief, a heavy collective sorrow that seemed to echo through every home. Hospitals across the colonies hung blue banners in memory of their fallen brothers and sisters. Candlelight vigils were held in space stations, the flames floating gently inside glass spheres. People lit candles not for war, but for the healers who had believed peace was possible. But grief doesn't stay quiet forever. Grief turns to anger, and anger spreads fast. Every news network replayed the last transmission of the Hope of Soul. That trembling voice, "Protect the wounded," became a rallying cry. Social feeds flooded with the same message. Artists painted murals of the ship surrounded by stars. Teachers told their students about the crew who gave their lives helping others, and families who had never cared about politics suddenly found themselves shouting for justice. Across Mars and the Luna colonies, people took to the streets. They carried pictures of the crew members, held signs with words like "Never again" and "Mercy is not weakness." Crowds filled every open space. Pilots, engineers, factory workers, doctors, and miners, all united by one feeling: enough was enough. The United Earth Council, which had been divided for years over trade and expansion, met in emergency session. The chamber was crowded with representatives from every colony, and for the first time in decades, no one argued over procedure or politics. The footage of the destroyed ship played on a massive screen behind the council's podium. The silence in the room was heavy. When the chairperson finally spoke, the words were simple. They attacked those who heal. They attacked those who save lives. They thought we would stay silent. They are wrong. A low murmur filled the chamber, then turned into a roar of agreement. Every delegate stood and raised their hand in support of one resolution: justice for the Hope of Soul. Back on Earth, factories that had been making civilian goods began switching to defense production. Engineers volunteered to work longer hours, many of them saying the same thing: "This isn't for revenge, it's for protection." Families supported them, sending food, letters, and supplies. The sense of unity was unlike anything humanity had felt in centuries. Old rivalries between nations and colonies vanished almost overnight. People realized that in the vastness of the galaxy they were one people, and when one of them bled, all of them did. In the spaceports, recruitment lines stretched for kilometers. Young men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting to sign up for fleet duty. Many of them had never been near a ship before. Some were children of doctors who had served on medical missions. Others had lost family in earlier border raids. But all of them shared the same expression: calm determination. Reporters asked one of the volunteers why he was joining. His answer was short: because they killed people who would have saved their lives. The world listened, and something inside humanity changed. They had always been known for their compassion, for their ability to forgive, to rebuild, to start again. But now the same compassion was fueling their will to act. They weren't planning conquest. They were demanding accountability. Across the colonies, people began wearing small blue pins shaped like the humanitarian symbol from the Hope of Soul. It became a silent oath, a promise that the loss would not be forgotten. Everywhere you went, you could see those pins on uniforms, jackets, and even children's backpacks. It reminded everyone that this wasn't just a story from the stars. It was personal. Meanwhile, in the military command centers, strategy meetings went on day and night. Fleet officers studied maps of Krylon space, their faces lit by holographic stars. They had been underestimated before, but this time there would be no hesitation. Earth was preparing, quietly but completely. In the media, journalists began to speak more boldly. One anchor looked straight into the camera during a live broadcast and said, "We have always believed in peace, but peace without respect is surrender." The line was replayed millions of times. Not everyone wanted war, but everyone wanted justice. Some leaders tried to calm the rising tension, urging restraint, but the people's voices were louder. They didn't want endless fighting. They wanted those who had broken the oldest rule of civilization to be held responsible. On the outer colonies, where many of the victims had come from, families gathered in open fields under artificial skies. They placed lanterns in the air, watching them rise like glowing stars. Each lantern carried a name: a doctor, a nurse, a patient. Some of the lights drifted together, merging into a soft cloud that hung above the colony for hours before fading into the night. In one city on Mars, a group of children painted a mural across a long wall. It showed a white ship flying through stars, surrounded by blue light. At the top, in big uneven letters, they wrote, "They healed the galaxy. We will remember them." Those images spread across human space faster than any official message. People shared them, printed them, projected them on the sides of buildings. And slowly, anger began to transform into purpose. The United Earth Fleet, which had once been a scattered collection of defense ships, began organizing into something much greater. The top admirals called for every available ship to return to dockyards for refitting. New designs were drawn overnight. Shipyards on Luna, Mars, and the asteroid belts lit up the darkness with welding sparks and engine fires. Massive hulls took shape under floodlights, each one carrying the same words along its side, "For the hope of Sol everywhere." You could feel the shift. Humanity had gone from mourning to motion. Back on Earth, the memorial for the hope of Sol opened to the public. It stood on the edge of the Pacific spaceport, a wide circular structure made of glass and steel. In the center, floating inside a transparent field, was a recovered fragment of the ship's hull, burned, twisted, but still carrying the faint outline of the blue medical symbol. People came from every world to see it. They stood quietly, some touching the glass, others just staring. The silence there wasn't empty, it was full of meaning. It was the silence before a storm. As the sun set over the spaceport, a voice spoke through the crowd, the same line everyone now knew by heart: "Protect the wounded." The words echoed softly, and the people repeated them together. Not as grief, but as a vow. In that moment, humanity understood something deep. Mercy was not a weakness. It was strength, the kind that comes from valuing life. And when someone tried to destroy that mercy, humanity would rise together to defend it. Behind closed doors, the Earth Council began discussing military action. They didn't announce it yet, not publicly, but across the command networks, encrypted messages were already moving. Orders were being drafted, fleet rosters were being updated, and out in the colonies, the people didn't need to be told what was coming. They could feel it. The stars themselves seemed to hum with a quiet, restless energy, as if even the universe knew that something unstoppable had been set in motion. The attack on the hope of Sol had been meant to frighten humanity, to show them their place. Instead, it had united them in a way nothing else ever had. The message was spreading everywhere, whispered in homes, shouted in protests, printed on signs, painted on walls. They attacked a medical ship. Earth will answer. And this time, every man, woman, and child in the human worlds believed it. Not out of hatred, but out of love for those who had given their lives healing others. It was no longer just a tragedy. It had become a promise. Factories that had been quiet for years were alive again. The sound of heavy machinery, sparks from welding torches, and the deep thrum of reactors filled the air. Humanity had decided there would be no more waiting. The attack on the hope of Sol had lit a fire in every heart, and that fire was now shaping steel. Across Earth and its colonies, work began day and night. In the shipyards of Luna, massive hangars that once built passenger vessels now produced armored cruisers. On Mars, engineers tested new shield generators, their faces lit by the glow of plasma welders. Even the asteroid stations once used for mining became construction yards for smaller combat crafts. But it wasn't about revenge. Everyone understood that clearly. This wasn't about blood, and it was about protection. Humanity had learned from its past wars, and this time the mission was simple: to make sure no one ever dared to harm the innocent again. The workers who built the ships didn't think of themselves as soldiers. They were parents, technicians, and teachers who had left their old jobs to help however they could. Some worked 16 hours a day, sleeping in corners of the factory between shifts. They didn't complain. Every spark that flew from the welding arcs reminded them of why they were doing this. For the doctors, for the nurses, for the people on that white ship who never came home. In one massive hangar, a supervisor stood looking over a newly constructed battleship. Its hull was dark gray, lined with bright blue lights. The name had just been painted on its side in large white letters: Guardian of Sol. It was the first of the new class and the beginning of Earth's response. The workers stood silently for a moment as the paint dried. Then, without anyone saying a word, they started clapping. It wasn't loud at first, just a slow rhythm that grew stronger until the entire hangar echoed with it. The sound traveled through the metal walls and out into the open yard. For them, that ship wasn't just metal, it was a promise. Back on Earth, the Council's command centers were filled with activity. Maps of the galaxy glowed on giant holographic displays. Fleet officers studied every route, every known Krylan base. The leaders debated tactics, but everyone agreed on one thing: Earth would not attack recklessly. Every move had to be precise, lawful, and just. They weren't conquerors. They were protectors who had been forced to draw their swords. Meanwhile, humanity's greatest minds were working behind the scenes. Scientists and engineers, some of them old enough to remember the early days of spaceflight, returned from retirement. Young cadets trained in simulators that ran nonstop. Universities offered free courses for anyone willing to serve in logistics or communications. It wasn't just soldiers preparing for war. It was an entire civilization standing together. One technician on Mars said it best during an interview: "We're not building weapons. We're building shields that can't be broken again." The spirit of unity reached places it had never touched before. Old political rivalries disappeared. Even corporations that once competed against each other began sharing technology and resources. No one wanted profit. They wanted safety. Families across the colonies sent messages to the front lines telling their loved ones they were proud. Many families hung small blue flags outside their homes, each one representing a promise to support the cause. It became a universal sign of solidarity. Whether you were on a farming station or a city dome, the blue flag meant one thing: for the hope of Sol. In the middle of this massive movement, humanity's fleet began to take shape. It wasn't just a military force anymore, it was a symbol. Massive carriers, destroyers, and dreadnoughts assembled in orbit. Drone ships were programmed to act as shields, ready to intercept any threat before it reached human settlements. But alongside these warships, there were also new medical vessels, rebuilt from the same design as the Hope of Sol. Their hulls were white again, brighter than before. This time, however, they traveled under escort. No more would the healers travel alone. Every medical ship now had a guardian fleet watching over it. In one emotional broadcast, a representative from the United Earth Council spoke to the people. "We will build ships to protect those who heal. We will stand between them and those who bring harm. The galaxy will learn that humanity does not forget those who serve life." That speech was played across every screen, from Earth to the farthest mining outposts. People cried, but they also smiled. There was hope again. On the day of the first fleet inspection, the skies above Earth shimmered with hundreds of ships. They floated in formation, their lights reflecting off the oceans below. People gathered in cities and fields, watching the glowing patterns move across the night sky. It was beautiful, peaceful even. A reminder that humans could build wonders when united. Down below, an old pilot watched from his farmhouse porch. He had once flown cargo ships during the early colonization days. Now, as he looked up, he whispered softly, "They finally learned to stand together." That same night, news broke that the Krylan Dominion had dismissed Earth's diplomatic protest. Their response was short and cold. They called the destruction of the Hope of Sol an unfortunate misunderstanding and refused to apologize. That message hit humanity like a second blow, but instead of fear, it fueled even greater determination. Within hours, the United Earth Fleet received its official activation orders. The admirals called it Operation Dawn Shield. The goal was not to conquer, but to secure every human outpost, every trade route, and every humanitarian zone in space. Humanity was done asking for safety. They were going to build it with their own hands. As the fleet prepared to deploy, news channels broadcast scenes from the training stations. Pilots in zero-gravity simulators practiced evasive maneuvers. Navigation officers studied hyperspace routes. Engineers inspected engines, double-checking every bolt. There was exhaustion, but also pride. One pilot, speaking to a reporter, summed it up in simple words. "We're not going out there to destroy. We're going out there to make sure what happened to the Hope of Sol never happens again." The reporter nodded, holding back tears. That line became the official motto of the fleet. When the day finally came for launch, every city, every colony, and every orbital station stopped to watch. The fleet's engines lit up one by one, filling the dark sky with blue light. The sound couldn't be heard from the ground, but people could feel it, a deep, steady vibration through the air. The admiral in command sent out one universal message before departure. Her voice was calm but filled with quiet strength. "We do not go to destroy. We go to protect. We go to defend life, not end it. For every healer, for every innocent, for every lost voice, one we go. Those words echoed across every communication channel. People recorded them, played them on loudspeakers, and shared them everywhere. As the fleet moved away from Earth, leaving trails of blue fire behind, children waved from observation domes. Some saluted, some cried, and many whispered the same words, for the hope of Sol. Back in the factories, the workers kept building. They didn't stop even after the fleet left. They knew more ships would be needed, not just for war, but for rescue, for rebuilding, for peace that could last. And far above them, in the cold silence of space, the newly born ships of Earth's armada glided together, a silent storm forming in the dark. Humanity had changed. They had been wounded deeply, but they had not broken. The same hands that once built hospitals were now building shields. The same hearts that once healed others were now ready to defend them. The galaxy didn't yet understand what was coming. But humanity did. They had found their unity again, not through fear, but through love. Love for life, for each other, and for those who gave everything on that white ship long ago. The engines of the fleet burned brighter, lighting up the darkness like a sunrise. Humanity was no longer waiting. They were ready. The moment had finally come. After months of preparation, training, and waiting, Earth's armada was ready to move. The day the fleet launched became a date everyone would remember for generations. Across the colonies, people stood under the open sky, watching the night turn blue with the glow of thousands of ship engines. It wasn't just a fleet. It was humanity's answer to injustice. The United Earth Fleet moved out in perfect formation, leaving orbit in silence. The ships glided through the dark like silver arrows, their hulls gleaming in the starlight. Every vessel carried the same emblem on its side, a bright blue circle with a small white cross in the center. It was the same mark once painted on the Hope of Sol, and now it had become a symbol of unity, courage, and remembrance. Inside each ship, the atmosphere was tense but calm. Pilots checked systems, engineers monitored reactors, and communication officers maintained steady contact across the fleet. They weren't going to fight blindly. Every move had been planned carefully, every route calculated. Their destination was the edge of Krylon territory, the same sector where the Hope of Sol had been destroyed. It was a place now burned into human memory, a place they would never forget. The plan was simple. Establish a defensive perimeter near the border, show presence, and deliver one clear message: Earth will not be attacked again. But everyone knew what could happen if the Krylon commanders chose aggression. The fleet wasn't there to start a war, but they were prepared to finish one if forced. The Krylon Dominion had grown arrogant. For decades, they had looked down on humans as soft, too emotional to survive among the stars. Their leaders believed the destruction of one medical ship had proven their superiority. They didn't realize they had only awakened something far more powerful: human unity. When Earth's armada came out of hyperspace, the sudden appearance of hundreds of ships shocked the Krylon border stations. Their scanners filled with new contacts: battleships, carriers, support cruisers, and escort vessels, all moving in precise formation. For a few moments, there was only static across the channels. Then a calm human voice broadcast a message to every frequency: "This is the United Earth Fleet. We come in defense of peace. Do not engage. Do not interfere with humanitarian operations." It was a peaceful message, but the tone behind it carried strength. The Krylon commanders didn't respond. Instead, they scrambled their patrol ships, uncertain whether to attack or retreat. The first confrontation happened near an abandoned mining moon. A small group of Krylon fighters tried to intercept one of Earth's advanced ships. They fired warning shots, a mistake they would regret instantly. Within seconds, the human dreadnoughts shifted formation. They didn't open fire at first. Instead, they activated energy shields and surrounded the attackers, cutting off their escape routes. A warning was sent again: "Stand down. We will not fire unless attacked." But the Krylon pilots didn't understand restraint. They believed humanity's kindness was still weakness. They fired again. That was the last mistake they made. In perfect synchronization, Earth's ships responded. Precision beams struck the enemy vessels, disabling engines without destroying them. The Krylon ships drifted helplessly, their weapons offline. Humanity could have finished them. But they didn't. Instead, they sent rescue drones to collect the survivors. That act stunned the galaxy. The footage was transmitted live, showing human soldiers pulling enemy pilots from damaged ships and giving them medical care. The message was clear. Earth would fight fiercely, but never cruelly. As the operation continued, Earth's fleet began securing the border worlds. They liberated human trade convoys that had been under blockade and reopened humanitarian corridors. Wherever they went, they rebuilt communication networks, restored colonies, and offered help to alien civilians who had suffered under Krylon control. Even neutral species, who had once doubted humanity, started sending messages of support. One alien ambassador said, "We thought the humans had lost their spirit. We were wrong. They have found it again, and it burns brighter than ever." The Krylon Dominion, however, could not accept defeat. Their leaders called Earth's actions an invasion, though every neutral observer could see it wasn't. Still, pride pushed them into battle. Soon, a massive Krylon war fleet began to assemble near the red nebula known as Varen's Reach, a place that had seen countless space conflicts in the past. When Earth's admirals received the news, they didn't hesitate. The fleet was ordered to advance. The largest mobilization in human history was now heading straight toward the enemy armada. Before departure, the commanders sent one final broadcast to every ship. "Remember why we are here. We fight for the lives that were taken. We fight to protect the innocent. We fight for those who heal. Do not forget who we are." Those words became the heartbeat of the fleet. As the ships approached Varen's Reach, the nebula glowed like a red storm, beautiful but dangerous. Energy surges danced through space, creating streaks of light that looked like lightning in the void. Amid that glowing chaos, two armadas faced each other, thousands of ships from both sides filling the dark with silent tension. For a long time, neither side moved. The human ships held formation, shields raised but weapons locked. The Krylon fleet spread out, their commanders shouting orders across encrypted channels. Then, as the silence stretched longer, the first shot was fired. Not by humanity, but by the Krylon flagship. The beam tore through space, hitting one of Earth's escort vessels. Its shields flared brightly, then held firm. Within seconds, the battle began. The void lit up with bursts of light as ships darted through the nebula. The human fleet moved with precision, every squadron supporting the other, every maneuver calculated. The Krylon fleet, though larger, was disorganized, relying on brute strength. Inside the control decks, human crews worked like a single heartbeat. Pilots focused, engineers rerouted power, and officers called out positions. They had trained for this moment, not to destroy but to defend. And slowly, the tide began to turn. Earth's fleet used tactics the Krylon commanders didn't understand. Instead of attacking head-on, they coordinated in flexible patterns using smaller ships to distract and outflank. Their new shield technology absorbed impacts that would have crippled older vessels. Within hours, half of the Krylon fleet was disabled. The human dreadnoughts, massive ships built in the shipyards of Luna, moved forward like guardians. Their beams cut through the darkness, not with rage but with precision. Every strike was controlled. Every move was deliberate. The Krylon flagship tried to retreat behind the nebula's magnetic clouds, but Earth's fleet surrounded it. Instead of destroying it, they disabled its engines and opened communication. The human commander's message was simple. "This is over. Stand down. No more innocent lives will be lost." The Krylon admiral refused at first, shouting through the static. But when he saw the full scale of Earth's formation, the calm precision, the unity, his tone changed. The arrogance was gone. For the first time, he understood what kind of strength came from compassion. As the last blasts faded and the nebula settled into silence, humanity had won, not through anger, but through discipline. Their victory wasn't measured in destruction, but in restraint. Across the galaxy, news channels replayed the footage. People watched as human rescue ships moved in, offering medical care even to their enemies. The same blue symbol from the Hope of Sol was visible on every rescue pod. That image spread faster than any weapon ever could. In the following days, the Krylon fleet retreated completely. They left behind wrecked ships and damaged pride. Humanity didn't chase them. The mission had been accomplished, peace through strength and honor through mercy. Back home, the news was met with both pride and sorrow. Families cheered for the victory, but also mourned the few who had fallen. Cities lit their skylines in blue and white, colors of remembrance. The old and the young stood together, watching the fleet return home through live broadcasts. And when the first ships re-entered Earth's orbit, they didn't arrive as conquerors. They arrived as guardians and protectors who had carried humanity's promise into the stars and kept it. The same night, a broadcast from Earth's Council reached every colony, every settlement, and every station. The voice was calm and filled with quiet pride. The hope of Sol is avenged not by vengeance but by honor. Humanity has shown that compassion is not weakness. We have fought with strength, and we have remembered who we are. That message echoed across the galaxy, carried on every signal, translated into every language. And somewhere in the quiet of deep space among the ruins of the battle, a single beacon light blinked, a rescue signal left by the humans to guide survivors home. It flashed softly through the red mist, repeating one message over and over: for the hope of Sol. The great battle at Varen's Reach had ended, but its echo still traveled through the stars. Across the galaxy, people spoke about what had happened, how the humans, once underestimated, had stood against the mighty Krylan dominion and won. But more than victory, it was their mercy that left everyone speechless. Even among the Krylan people, there were whispers of respect. Many had expected humans to take revenge, to burn their worlds as repayment for the past. Instead, humanity had shown restraint and compassion, something rare in an age when most species only believed in power. Weeks after the battle, the human fleet stayed near the neutral zone. They weren't there to conquer, but to rebuild. Many of the ships they had rescued still drifted in damaged condition. Human engineers, medics, and volunteers worked day and night to save as many as they could, even enemy survivors. In one of the orbiting medical stations, a group of Krylan officers lay in recovery beds. They looked uneasy as human doctors moved between them, checking vitals and giving treatment. One of the officers, older and more experienced than the others, finally spoke. "Why help us? You could have left us in the debris." The human doctor paused for a moment and replied softly, "Because someone once did the same for us. Compassion doesn't vanish because of war. It's what makes us who we are." That single sentence spread across media broadcasts, quoted in articles, and shared by millions. It became a symbol of what the battle had really meant. Not a clash of fleets, but a clash of values. While the soldiers healed, the fleet leaders met aboard the command vessel Unity. Around a circular table, holographic maps floated above the surface, showing new borderlines and trade routes. The admirals discussed defense zones, communication links, and humanitarian corridors. There was no talk of occupation or dominance, and only protection and rebuilding. "Peace doesn't last if it's built on pride," one of them said. "We'll protect our people, but we'll also help those who were misled by their leaders. If we show fairness, others will follow." And that's exactly what happened. Within weeks, neutral alien nations that had once avoided humans began to open dialogue. Trade ships returned to human space, and ambassadors visited Earth's orbiting stations. What had begun as a show of strength slowly turned into a movement of unity. On Earth, people celebrated, but not with wild parades or empty pride. It was a quieter kind of joy, filled with relief, gratitude, and reflection. Families who had worried for months could finally breathe again. Children who had seen their parents leave for war now waited at ports, waving small blue flags as ships began to return. The first vessel to arrive home was Horizon Dawn, one of the carriers that had led rescue operations. When it entered the atmosphere, the skies above the capital shimmered with light from its engines. Thousands gathered near the landing site, standing in silence as the massive ship settled on the runway. As the crew stepped out, they weren't met with shouts or fireworks. Instead, they were greeted with applause that grew softer, warmer, more emotional with every passing second. Many of them had tears in their eyes. They had seen destruction, but they had also seen the best of humanity rise in its place. Among the returning fleet was also the ship Beacon 1, carrying thousands of rescued survivors, both human and alien. When the ship's doors opened, medics, volunteers, and journalists rushed to welcome them. It was the first time in history that enemies and allies stepped onto the same ground together. Not in conflict, but in peace. The media called it the return of light. It became one of the most viewed moments in human history, not because of war footage, but because of the quiet gestures of kindness. Soldiers helping injured enemies walk down ramps, children handing out water bottles, and strangers hugging without words. Over the next few months, Earth began working on a new plan, not just for its defense, but for the galaxy's future. The United Earth Council proposed something that surprised everyone, an alliance dedicated not to war, but to protection and humanitarian aid. It would include multiple species, with shared resources, joint training, and peaceful technology exchange. At first, many alien governments were skeptical. But when they saw what humanity had achieved at Varen's reach, strength without cruelty, victory without hatred, they began to believe it might work. One by one, they joined. The new organization was named the Coalition of Hope. Its emblem was simple, the same blue circle that had once been painted on the Hope of Sol. That symbol, once representing a single ship, now represented an entire alliance. Meanwhile, back in the shipyards orbiting Luna, engineers were busy rebuilding the fleet. Some of the older ships that had survived the battle were retired and preserved as monuments. The largest of them, Guardian Spirit, was placed in orbit as a museum, a reminder of what unity could accomplish. Visitors from every world came to see it. Inside, they found not weapons or trophies, but stories, photos, recordings, and messages from the people who had fought and healed. One room displayed a collection of items found after the battle: a cracked helmet, a burnt patch of metal, and a small medallion engraved with the words, "For the Hope of Sol." That medallion had been found floating near the wreckage of a destroyed cruiser. No one knew who it belonged to, but it became the museum's most cherished relic. People would stand quietly before it, reading the inscription and feeling something stir in their hearts. Even in the outer colonies, the story spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about ships and battles anymore. It was about what humanity stood for. Schools taught it to children. Artists painted it. Musicians composed songs about the light that shone through darkness. In one colony far from Earth, a teacher told her students, "History remembers those who destroy, but it honors those who protect." Her words captured exactly what people now felt. But while the galaxy celebrated, the leaders of the Krylan Dominion faced unrest. Many of their citizens began questioning everything they had been told about humans. "If they are weak," one Krylan worker said in a broadcast, "then why did they spare us when they could have ended us?" That simple question spread across their networks faster than any propaganda could stop it. Some Krylan fleets even surrendered voluntarily, refusing to fight a people who had shown them mercy. The Dominion's rulers tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. Change had already begun within their own society. Back on Earth, preparations began for a memorial, a monument to those who had fallen during the war. It would stand in the capital city overlooking the ocean. Construction took months, involving volunteers from every colony and species that had joined the Coalition of Hope. When it was finally unveiled, the monument took everyone's breath away. It wasn't a statue of a soldier or a general. Instead, it was a sculpture of two hands, one human, one alien, reaching toward each other, holding a small sphere of light between them. At the base, the words were simple: "In unity, we found strength." During the unveiling ceremony, the commander of the fleet stood before a silent crowd and spoke quietly. "We didn't fight to prove we were powerful. We fought to prove we hadn't forgotten what makes us human. The galaxy now knows compassion is our greatest weapon." As he stepped back, the crowd applauded, and the sound carried through the night like a promise. From that day onward, the stars no longer seemed as cold or distant. Every colony, every world connected to Earth felt part of something larger, a shared destiny built on courage, kindness, and understanding. Over the next few years, the coalition expanded. New ships were built not as war machines but as rescue and exploration vessels. They were designed to travel deep into uncharted regions, carrying doctors, scientists, and ambassadors. Instead of weapons, they carried hope, and among them was a new flagship, constructed as a tribute to everything humanity had learned. Its name was chosen unanimously, Hope of Sol II. When it launched, millions watched as it rose from the shipyards and entered orbit. The name painted across its hull glowed softly in blue, Inside its bridge, the crew looked out at the stars ahead. They knew that their mission wasn't about war anymore. It was about discovery, peace, and the future of every living being that shared the galaxy. Before departure, the captain sent a final message to Earth, broadcast across every frequency. Once again, we go where the light leads us. Not to conquer, not to take, but to learn and protect. May every world we visit remember, humanity came not with fear, but with friendship. As the ship disappeared into the depths of space, the people watching from below felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Pure, unshakable hope. And somewhere, among the countless stars, the spirit of the Hope of Sol seemed to shine once more, not as a ghost of the past, but as a promise for the future, a future where humanity didn't just survive among the stars. They belonged there. Years had passed since the Great War that changed everything. The scars of battle had healed, but the lessons remained. The stars that once carried the echo of conflict now carried the sound of peace, quiet, steady, and full of promise. Humanity had grown, not through power, but through understanding. The fleets that once stood ready for war were now protectors of trade routes, peacekeepers of distant colonies, and companions to worlds that had once feared them. The name Earth no longer carried the weight of suspicion. It carried respect. In the orbit above Earth, the Hope of Sol II glided silently through the darkness. Its hull shimmered with faint blue light, a symbol of unity and remembrance. Inside, its crew worked with calm precision, their voices soft, their faces filled with purpose. They weren't soldiers anymore. They were explorers, teachers, healers. Every corridor of the ship told a story. On one wall, there was a simple plaque engraved with words that everyone aboard knew by heart. We rise not for vengeance, but for the light that guides us. The Hope of Sol II was more than a ship. It was a message traveling through the stars. Wherever it went, it carried aid, knowledge, and friendship. On planets torn by natural disasters, it brought relief. On stations struggling with shortages, it shared supplies. On worlds divided by distrust, it offered hope. Its crew came from many species, not just humans. Some had once fought on opposite sides of the war, but now they worked together. Their laughter filled the halls, their different languages blending into something beautiful. One of the crew members, a young technician from one of the outer colonies, often said, "Peace isn't built in speeches. It's built in the small moments, when we help someone who once feared us." And that simple truth became the ship's unofficial motto. Back on Earth, life had changed in ways no one expected. The once divided nations now worked together under a single council. There were no more weapons races, no secret projects to outmatch one another. Instead, the brightest minds focused on exploration, medicine, and environmental renewal. The old factories that once forged armor now built habitats for planets that needed rebuilding. The same shipyards that once built warships now produced vessels for rescue and education. Humanity had learned something that couldn't be taught in classrooms, that strength without compassion meant nothing. Children growing up in that new age didn't learn about war first. They learned about peace, unity, and courage. In schools, teachers told stories not of heroes who destroyed, but of heroes who healed. And among those stories, one name was always mentioned with deep respect: the Hope of Sol. There was even a day celebrated across every colony and planet connected to Earth. It was called Remembrance of Light Day. On that day, people gathered in parks, plazas, and open domes to release small lanterns that floated upward, glowing in the air or drifting into the night sky. Each lantern carried a silent wish for peace. In one such ceremony, a child asked his father, "Why do we light these lanterns every year?" The father smiled softly and said, "Because once, long ago, a light was lost in the darkness. And when humanity found it again, we promised never to let it fade." That answer spread from that small town to the stars. It reminded everyone that even the smallest light could change the course of history. As time went on, the coalition of hope grew stronger. Dozens of species joined. Trade between planets flourished. The old boundaries of race and world began to fade. People no longer introduced themselves as human or Krylon or Varen. They simply said, "I am of the coalition." It was a unity no one thought possible before the war. But peace was not without challenges. There were still disagreements, old grudges that occasionally resurfaced, and new threats in unexplored regions. Yet the difference now was in how people faced them. Instead of fear, they responded with dialogue. Instead of mistrust, they offered understanding. Even the Krylon Dominion, once humanity's greatest enemy, had changed. Their old leaders had long been replaced, and their society began to open itself to others. They even invited human advisors to help rebuild their devastated worlds. The same people they had once feared now worked beside them, teaching medicine, engineering, and cooperation. In one of the Krylon cities, a statue was erected, not of a warrior but of a human medic holding a child. The inscription read, "They showed us mercy when we deserved none. We will never forget." That monument became a pilgrimage site for both Krylon and human visitors. It wasn't about guilt or pride. It was about learning that compassion was stronger than any weapon. On the other side of the galaxy, Hope of Soul 2 continued its long mission. One day, while crossing a newly charted region of space, the crew detected a faint distress signal. The voice was weak, old, and distorted, coming from a ship that seemed centuries old. When they found it, the entire crew fell silent. It was a small vessel, its hull battered and covered in dust from countless micrometeor impacts. The identification code was barely readable, but when it finally came through, every person on the bridge gasped. It was the original Hope of Soul, the ship that had started it all, the one that had been lost in that fateful attack so many years ago. With great care, they brought it aboard their hangar bay. Engineers and historians worked together to restore its interior, preserving every detail. It wasn't about technology anymore. It was about memory. When the doors opened and the crew stepped inside, they found old medical equipment, faded insignias, and a broken communication console that had once sent the last message before the tragedy. In the captain's cabin, they found a log entry still intact. The words were simple. "If someone finds this ship, remember we were healers. We came with open hands. Tell them humanity meant no harm." Those words brought tears to the eyes of everyone who read them. The ship was transported back to Earth, where it was placed next to the Monument of Unity. The two ships, Hope of Soul and Hope of Soul II, now stood side by side. One a memory of sacrifice, the other a symbol of what that sacrifice had achieved. When the restored Hope of Soul was finally displayed to the public, billions tuned in to watch the ceremony. The leader of the coalition spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. This ship began its journey as a messenger of healing. It was silenced by fear, but fear did not win. Humanity carried its message across the stars, and today, that message lives again. As she finished speaking, thousands of lights lit up around the monument, glowing blue like the first dawn after a long night. The crowd stood in silence, some crying, others smiling. Across every screen, one message appeared in bright letters: "For the Hope of Soul, and for all who carry the light." From that day onward, the Hope of Soul became more than a story. It became a tradition. Every new ship built by the Coalition carried a small plate inside its hull, engraved with the same words found in that old log entry. It was a reminder that even in a galaxy full of darkness, one act of kindness could change everything. Generations passed. Children who had grown up hearing stories of the Hope of Soul became captains, engineers, and explorers. The stars that had once seemed so distant were now filled with life and cooperation. Humanity had not only survived, it had helped others thrive. Even in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, when people met a human traveler, they didn't see a warrior or a conqueror. They saw a protector, a friend, someone whose ancestors had carried light into the dark and never let it go out. And so, the legacy continued, somewhere deep in space. The Hope of Soul 2 cruised past a brilliant nebula, its hull reflecting the colorful lights. Inside, the captain looked out at the vastness before them and whispered quietly, "We are home." Because now, home wasn't just Earth. It was everywhere life existed. Everywhere people chose peace over hatred, compassion over revenge, and unity over division. The galaxy had learned something that would never be forgotten, that true power comes not from domination, but from understanding. And the humans, once called fragile, had become the strongest of all. Not because of their weapons, but because of their hearts. As the Hope of Soul 2 drifted farther into the stars, a small message blinked on its hull in soft blue light. For those who heal, for those who protect, for those who carry the light. And with that, humanity's story continued, and not as a warning, but as a beacon that told every world, every being, and every child born under a distant sun that even in the darkest times, the light of compassion never dies.